In the winter of 1943, deep inside the suffocating jungles of New Georgia, the U.S. Army's 25th Infantry Division, known as Tropic Lightning, pushed through mud, disease, and the invisible terror of Japanese snipers hidden high in the treetops. Every step forward felt like stepping into the sight line of an unseen rifle. It was a world where the simple sound of a twig snapping could mean death, and where soldiers slept knowing they might not wake. Into this grim landscape walked Corporal Dan Mercer, a quiet, soft-spoken man from Kansas who carried something most of the other soldiers laughed at, a mail-order hunting rifle he had bought through a magazine back home. It was long, slim, outdated, and looked more suited for picking off coyotes on a dusty prairie than fighting an Imperial sniper unit. Behind his back, soldiers joked that Mercer's toy gun wouldn't kill anything bigger than a rabbit. But Dan never responded. He simply polished the walnut stock, checked the basic hunting scope he'd mounted himself, and carried it with a calm confidence that turned even Sergeant Bill Tanner's head. Tanner, a man hardened by too much bloodshed, once asked him why he insisted on that rifle. Dan answered quietly, "It's the one I know. Grew up with one just like it. Never missed." Tanner grunted, half skeptical and half convinced. Most men still thought Mercer was a fool, until the day the snipers drew blood. One humid morning, as the squad moved cautiously through a narrow jungle path, a cracked shot echoed from the trees and a young private named Harris dropped instantly, dead before he hit the ground. Panic rippled. No one dared lift their head. The sniper had perfect range. The medic was pinned and couldn't move. The jungle turned silent except for Harris's last faint breaths. Tanner looked over to Mercer, who already had his rifle shouldered, calm as still water. "Can you see anything?" Tanner whispered. Dan didn't answer right away. He scanned the treetops, slow and steady, ignoring sweat dripping down his face. Then he caught it, a tiny flicker of reflected sunlight from a metal scope. "Got him," Dan murmured. A single shot rang out from his mail-order rifle, and a body fell from the branches. The squad exhaled as one. Nobody laughed at his rifle after that. But the Japanese noticed. And in their world, killing an elite sniper meant issuing an unspoken challenge. They would answer it viciously. 2 days later, at dawn, 3 expertly timed shots snapped from different positions, killing 2 Americans and wounding a third. It was no lone sniper now. It was a coordinated team hunting them. "Mercer!" Tanner hissed. "They're coming for you." Dan crawled forward, belly close to the earth, breathing slow and deep. Sniper duels were not about who had the best gun, but who became the quietest shadow. He listened carefully. A distant rustle. A slight shift in a branch. Most men wouldn't notice, but Dan grew up hunting foxes in tall Kansas grass where one wrong breath revealed everything. He saw an almost invisible outline on a tree trunk. He fired once, and dropped the first sniper. Another shot cracked immediately from the opposite direction. Dan did not panic. He slid sideways through ferns and vines, becoming part of the jungle's camouflage. After a minute he caught a small glint, just the reflection of a scope no bigger than a coin. He shot again. Another sniper fell. But the third one was smarter, more patient, almost as silent as the jungle itself. Dan waited motionless for nearly 20 minutes. Then he saw it, not a body, not a rifle, just a patch of shadow that didn't belong. He fired into the darkness and heard a faint gasp. The third sniper dropped. In 2 days, Mercer had taken out 3 trained marksmen. But their leader, Lieutenant Saito, considered one of the deadliest snipers in the entire Japanese force, was watching. Saito was a ghost in human form. He was known to move across branches without sound and had more than 40 confirmed kills. When he learned of Mercer, he didn't respond with anger. He responded with interest. To him, Mercer was not a nuisance. He was a rival. And so began a 4-day duel between 2 men who would never meet face to face but who understood each other through the language of silence, patience, and death. On the first day, at dawn, Saito fired at Mercer the moment he stepped from his foxhole. The bullet missed Dan's head by inches. Dan dove and rolled behind a tree trunk while another bullet smashed into the bark. They were separated by only a couple hundred yards, dangerously close for snipers. For 2 hours, either man fired again. Both waited for the other to make a mistake. Mercer eventually crawled through vines and mud, circling quietly. He found Sato's firing branch and shot it, causing the platform to wobble. A camouflaged assistant lost balance and Mercer shot him mid-fall. Not Saito, just one of his shadows. The duel had barely begun. The next day the Americans couldn't move forward at all. Every time a soldier shifted even slightly, a bullet zipped by. "Mercer," Tanner said, gripping his shoulder. "We can't lose more men. End this." Dan nodded and slipped alone into the jungle. Hours passed. The sun scorched the earth. His uniform clung to his skin, soaked in sweat. He found a vine tied into an unnatural loop, Sato's marker. A warning. Dan smiled faintly. He crawled through brush until he reached a ridge and inhaled deeply. He caught a faint scent of gun oil. He fired into a dense bush without hesitation. Another Japanese sniper fell. Still not Saito. The third day brought monsoon rain so heavy it drowned sound itself. Rain dripped into Dan's eyes and soaked through his scope. Visibility dropped to mere meters. Saito fired through the storm, hitting an American named Blake in the leg. Blake's scream cut through Dan's soul. He dragged himself through mud, letting the rain wash his lens. Then he saw something he had learned long ago while hunting. One raindrop suspended unnaturally on a rifle barrel sticking from a hollow log. Dan fired instantly. A body slumped out. Another sniper down. And still Saito eluded him. The fourth day felt like the climax of some cruel ritual. The jungle was dead silent. Even birds refused to sing. Dan woke with a tightness in his chest that told him this would end today, one way or another. He moved alone again, deeper than ever before. Hours passed. Nothing moved except the distant flicker of insects. Then he found a carving in a tree. Japanese kanji scratched sharply into the bark. It read, "Only one hunter may leave." Saito was calling him forward with a message of absolute finality. At around mid-afternoon, Dan felt a bullet tear past his ear. The pressure wave stung his cheek. Saito had fired from less than 150 yards. Dan dove behind a massive exposed root as another shot dug into the ground near his boot. Saito wasn't hiding anymore, he was advancing. Circling. Herding Dan like prey. Dan's instincts flared. He crawled backward silently, flattening himself against the earth. Saito shifted again, quiet, nearly undetectable. But Dan caught it, a barely perceptible quiver in a bush. Not wind. Not an animal. A breath. Human breath. Dan didn't aim for a head or rifle. He aimed for the breathing itself. One shot. The world went silent. A body fell forward. Dan stayed still for a full minute, making sure. Then he approached carefully and saw the truth. It was Lieutenant Saito. The rival who had hunted him for days now lay motionless, a faint expression of surprise frozen on his face. The jungle seemed to exhale with relief. Over 4 unending days, Dan Mercer killed 11 Japanese snipers, including some of the most elite marksmen in the Pacific Theater. The jungle that had mocked him with death now whispered strange respect. When he returned to camp, the same soldiers who had once laughed at his rifle stepped aside as he walked past. Tanner clapped him on the shoulder with a pride he rarely showed and said, "Mercer, you saved this whole company." Dan didn't smile. He simply sat and cleaned his rifle with the same gentle care he did back home in Kansas. One private whispered, "That mail-order gun just won us the ridge." Another said, "That wasn't the gun. That was him." After the war, Dan returned to Kansas. He never bragged, never sought medals, never wrote books. Sometimes, at dusk, he sat with a simple hunting rifle across his lap, the same kind he ordered for a few dollars from a magazine long before bullets started flying. People never understood why he kept it. But Dan Mercer knew. Because it wasn't the rifle that changed the war. It was the boy who grew up with it and the calm, unshakable instincts he carried into the deadliest jungles on earth. Men once laughed at his rifle. They never laughed again.